Спасибо вам всем огромное, что вы пришли. Я еще раз напоминаю, что у нас сегодня двухчастное присутствие ваше и наше выступление. Это первый час наши великие гости Питер, Гринуэй и Саския Боддеке. А вторая часть, те, кто на нее останутся, это более подробный рассказ вот об этой образовательно-просветительской программе проекции «Авангарда», потому что это не только лекции, это еще и спектакли. Мы делаем не один продакшн, у нас вслед за этим студенты будут делать «Смерть тарелки», например, Хольду делают и так далее и тому подобное. Вот, поэтому оставайтесь с нами до конца, до Welcome Drink, чтобы уже обсудить, как же это все будет. Вот. А сейчас, конечно, я вернусь к нашим героям. Многие из вас здесь сидят в зале именно потому, что хотят услышать, что же приготовили Саския Боддеке и Питер Гринуэй и Саския Боддеке в том черном кубе, который уже маячит перед вами, и никого туда не пускают, и, конечно, никого туда не пустят до понедельника, до вечера, когда у нас будет грандиозное открытие. Я только хочу во-первых, в первую очередь поблагодарить, что Питер и Саския согласились сделать этот величайший проект, потому что изначально идеи претерпевали очень много изменений. Питер и Саския хотели показать нашим зрителям, например, историю нидерландской живописи, либо оживить какую-либо работу из нашего мирового наследия. И путем долгих переговоров, знакомства с русской историей и любви, конечно, самого Питера и Саскии к Сергею Эйзенштейну, к Малевичу, к Кандинскому, мы поняли, что интересен-то нашим художникам именно весь период авангарда, как цельное золотое событие. И вот тогда пришла эта идея сделать вот эту 18-экранную инсталляцию, если кто еще не знает, да, с таким звуком, с таким световым сценарием, помимо этого полиэкранного кино, что я и сама-то боюсь увидеть до конца вот это воплощенное произведение. Пришла идея сделать вот все то, что, наверное, не было воплощено в период фантазии авангарда. Вот это вот отсутствие времени и пространства, когда оно входит в тебя, а ты входишь в них, и начинается вот это погружение в художественную работу создание того времени, которое ты начинаешь жить в этом времени. Поэтому огромное спасибо, что вот такой путь мы выбрали, и мы практически уже доходим почти до конца работы над самим проектом, над темой и над инсталляцией. Больше не буду занимать время у Питера и Саскии, передаю слово. Спасибо.
Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Maybe I can already ask if the first row of lights can be switched off. Welcome to our speech about our installation. I think the two people in front of us already explained what we are doing. We are making a multimedia installation about the Russian avant-garde. It's not a documentary. It's not a history lesson in Russian avant-garde, because we are well aware when we speak to the people here that you know much more about the Russian avant-garde than we do. Why we did the project is that, I think the more and more deeper we got into it is that we fell in love with the Russian avant-garde, and that we also were very much intrigued about the period, what happened to the artists, the freedom they had to create and to become crazy creative. I spoke in the past few days with a few journalists about it, and I always say I'm jealous I did not live in that period as an artist, because it would have been amazing to have so many strong creative people around. It's very difficult to explain what you're going to experience in our installation. We call it a multimedia installation, and I would say it's more an experience. Therefore, I would like to show you a short trailer of what we've made, and then we explain more about the project.
Мы должны измениться. России нечего предложить миру, кроме своих масс и тяжелой работы. Никаких новых изобретений, никаких современных технологий. Мы просто копируем иностранцев, которых презираем за то, что вынуждены их копировать. Это должно измениться. Великая утопия.
Художник обязан быть глашатаем перемен. Его искусство всегда должно быть направлено на какую-то цель.
Жил когда-то лис в русских лесах. И решил он перехитрить своих сограждан, чтобы они выдали сами себя.
Мы должны быть готовы узреть утопические прозрения.
В моей сказке про лиса лис начал нахваливать их мастерство и таланты.
Мы на страже у врат. Мои действия художника русской революции полны утопических возможностей.
Великая утопия. Мы трудимся над великой утопией.
Но мы должны быть искренни. В полном объеме.
Не к новому, не к старому, а к нужному. Вот наш новый девиз.
Мы на страже у врат. Никакой лжи.
Мы заслуживаем ее.
Внимание к детали. Внимание к ремеслу. Питай свое вдохновение, но доноси его с той тщательностью, которая достигается только самым упорным трудом.
La couleur est la réponse à tout ce qui, dans la peinture actuelle, a cherché à se libérer de l'envie d'illustrer un texte.
Кинематографический язык способен выразить любую концепцию, любую идею равенства, любой политический или тактический лозунг, не прибегая к помощи драматического или психологического прошлого.
Театр – это так просто. Встань в угол, закричи, заплачь. И вот он, театр, принадлежит нам всем.
Что нас всех интересует, так это другие люди. Их чувство цвета, очертания, формы и масштаб сложились не в одночасье. Не упустите то, что воистину важно, избавляясь от серого и ненужного. Хватит с нас мольбертной станковой живописи в башнях из слоновой кости. Наше творчество должно служить всему народу и всему новому обществу. Нам следует сосредоточиться на текстиле, на керамике, на мебели, на покрывалах, на детской одежде, а также игрушках и на всем том, чем мы пользуемся каждый день, и не позволять произведениям искусства бесполезно висеть на стене. Ты не замечаешь свободу, пока не потеряешь ее.
Лис убедил своих беспечных сограждан проявить свой талант и уговорил их громко запеть, чтобы стало очевидно, что голос их не уступает их прекрасному оперению.
Я поэт. Этим и интересен.
Ты
Об этом пишу. Про свою любовь,
не замечаешь
про азартное настроение,
свободу,
про то, как красив Кавказ.
пока не потеряешь
Об остальном
ее.
только если это отстоялось словом.
Когда-то мы были одно целое. У нас была общая вера. Теперь наше искусство стало бесплодным.
Уверуйте в то, что ново, в то, что ново.
Но неужели они действительно верят в то, что делают?
Они не ведают, что творят. Маяковский, вы безнадежный романтик. Вы слишком хорошо думаете о людях.
Да, но Россия полна тиранами и безнадежными романтиками.
Свободолюбивые сограждане Лиса вдохновенно пели о его тирании до тех самых пор, пока Лис не оторвал им все головы и всех их не сожрал.
Искусство — это не зеркало, отражающее реальность, а молот, ее формирующий.
You could put the light on again. What you see here is a compilation of few of the screens which will be in the installation. The installation is a compilation of 18 screens in which we tell the story, how we see it and how we, Peter and I, look at your Russian avant-garde. We chosen 12 artists from the period which have been introduced in this trailer. And we used Vera, and please forgive me if I don't say the name correct, Firma Ermolaiva, as our red line through the installation. When the audience goes in, it is not like you are like now you sit in the dark and you watch the video, and it is a story we tell you, and you all almost experience the same experience. But in the installation, we hope that each person will have his or her own experience, because it is a loop which will continue. And wherever you go in the space, you will pick up information, and you will pick up poetry and imagery of the Russian avant-garde. And sometimes people can sit around and look at it from that perspective. So it's more like an experience, what we hope people will find in this installation. Want to say something? You must speak in here, Peter.
Well, self-evidently, Saskia has made an introduction, which I'm sure covers the ground. I always think that probably three things for me, for us, would be certainly necessary. First of all, there is indeed, of course, the notion of the content. Most of the world knows about the Russian avant-garde, and they would certainly know names like Mayakovsky and Malevich, Kandinsky. But for a large numbers of people, it's still a mysterious phenomenon. I suppose very much in an amalgam about the other things that were happening at the beginning of the 20th century, certainly, post-impressionism and certainly Italian futurism. So we're very, very keen to make, I suppose, a identity of both the differences and also the samenesses, which would be part of that great adventure in cultural activity at the beginning of the 20th century. So that's the first thing, the content. The French have said there's no such thing as content anymore, there's only language, and there's that other famous American phrase, which you're all familiar with, that the medium is the message, which would certainly lead me on to the second two characteristics. The second one, even if you do know all these illustrious names, who were they? They often seem to disappear behind the names. I suppose Mayakovsky and Malevich stand out very strongly, but what about some of the other characters? What, for example, what do we know about Rozhenko? What do we know about lesser well-known names? And I think it is human nature, certainly, about our curiosity about the people. And so, as you can see here, there's an attempt to flesh out those people with their likes and their dislikes and their biographies, not something biographical you can learn off the internet, but much more sort of subjective, taking their lives as a whole. How did they interact? They were a deeply quarrelsome group, often disagreeing one another in debate and quarrelsome all the comparatively short time in which they held the world stage. And I suppose both those things, this knowledge of content, what is the content, and how does it live for us emotionally, and certainly intellectually, and one would hope spiritually, which would bring us to the third area, which is certainly one which deeply interests us. What are we doing? What is the nature of an installation? What is the nature of an exhibition? There's a feeling now all over the world, certainly in Europe, that millions of young people want to be curators. They want to be able to sieve the information. We've now reached the 21st century. There's not much physically, geographically to explore anymore. And we can now take an overview. And how does the overview work? So we're not just getting books in our bookshops about Mayakovsky and Malevich. We're getting notions of the whole group of people and how they interact with the political and social events of the time. And even on a larger scale, what does it mean to be a Russian cultural ambassador in 1917 vis-a-vis the rest of Europe and vis-a-vis the rest of the world? And I suppose we've made sure that there's an embrace here of not just the I suppose, the classifiable 6 arts, but what was really fascinating about this period is the fact that we're into new technologies, we're into new means of mass production, we are legitimizing different areas of human activity, which I suppose once upon a time were not even considered to be, should we say, cultural in inverted commas. And that embrace is important, and also that leads us to how do we make this manifest? And I think there is a way that museum culture in the last 20 years has received an enormous jolt about the notions of preservation and, more importantly, the notions of education. So I think taking our license from what the members of the Russian avant-garde did, we want to be able to explore new ways of saying things. Now, we know the digital revolution is upon us, and it has changed the way we look at things. We're still, I suppose, in the very early stages of this digital revolution, but we want to explore the notion of simultaneity. We want to explore new narrative processes. We want to certainly make an embrace no longer of that singular vision of the dark space called cinema with a singular screen, but to give you something that's architectonic, that's something that's environmental. And I suppose that that, again, is relative, we like to believe, certainly to the aims and the ambitions, indeed, of the Russian avant-garde itself. In 3 years' time, what are we, 2014? 2017's coming up very soon, and I'm sure the whole of Russia will be considering that fateful year of 1917, when that huge political and social experiment began. And it seems like a good time to be able to reconsider the cultural values and what has, in a sense, continued to be regarded with enormous amount of respect and continuity, because it laid open, which I think certainly for us, at the gateway to the greatest, the very greatest of all cultural centuries we've ever had in the history of civilization, which indeed is the 20th century. If you are indeed fascinated by the practicalities, by the organization, as I'm sure you should be, maybe Saskia can say more about the background and the circumstances and the filming and the use indeed of Russian actors.
I mean, it's when I do these lectures with Peter, I sort of lose my words, because how can I find words when you have so many? I think that's also immediately the difference between us, and why we work so well together is that I always, it's not completely true because I will do myself shortage, but I will say Peter has the brains and I have the feeling, but I also have brains, so don't worry. But I feel that my heart is very much in this production. Of course, in the beginning, when we were thinking about how to approach this, and I had really to convince Peter to write me a script, which is almost like a story, which he would be very much against, and especially when it was related to the avant-garde, because why should you start with a written text and then illustrate it with images? So that was our first deep philosophic artistic fight about this project. But then in the end, I think how you described is that it is about the people behind these artworks, and I think we are all related to these people as artists, but also as human beings, of what these people try to achieve, and how hard it was for them in the end to maintain what they were doing, and that their beliefs were taken away from them. So we felt it was important to show that to the audience. It was a big learning process for me about the Russian avant-garde. I've been studying it now deeply for a year. And when we made the final choice for the artists, actually they were obvious because they are the strong ones. We felt we had to also put females in it, which was very important, and therefore Vera, which is an unknown artist, became very important in this installation. We casted the cast here in Moscow, and we brought them to Amsterdam to film this installation. They were with us in Amsterdam, I think, 4 days. And then all the picture research was done here in Russia, and in Amsterdam we have put the whole thing together. And now we are a few days here, and we are mounting the installation in the huge, beautiful space behind you.
Do you want to say something about the actual choice of actors?
Peter says maybe I would like to tell you something about the choice of actors. When we did the casting, they asked me what was important, and I said it's not important that they are lookalikes. We don't have to pretend they are Malevich or Mayakovsky. Apparently, I think Mayakovsky really looks like Mayakovsky, but that is more chance than planning. But that when we filmed it, is that I wanted an enormous amount of flexibility, that I could ask them to do it, give me many, many different colors. And that is what we did in the auditions here. We put people in front of the camera and asked them to give me green or red or yellow as a metaphor of acting. And based upon that, we made our selection. And I love them. I think they are all 12 really great. I fell in love with Mayakovsky, but he's too young for me. Sorry, Peter. And that is how we've done it, and we made animations. I think that is maybe one thing I would like to explain. If you go into the installation, you will also find 4 monitors with a world we call Second Life. Similar to the installation we do here in a manege, we also created in Second Life a multimedia installation about the Russian avant-garde. A lot of the animations you will find in the installation are created over there and filmed and taken out. So we asked artists, a multimedia artist around the world to collaborate with us on this project. So there's a Canadian artist, there's someone from Turkey, there's someone from France, there's someone from India, and they were all given an artist, and based upon the work of these Russian avant-garde artists, they made an interpretation inside this universal world. I don't know if you know Second Life. It's sort of reviving. It used to be known because it was a great place to have sex, digital sex. But now it becomes really a world where people make an enormous amount of art. And I think it is very interesting because it's a tool you can create easy your world. So you don't have to go through Maya or Blender, which are difficult 3D programs. I think for a lot of artists which are already creating, it is really an extension of their work. We put 4 monitors inside the space. So the visitor who visits our installation can also sit behind the monitors, and with an avatar, they can walk through the installation we made in Second Life, so that is running simultaneously. Linden Lab, who is the owner of Second Life, sponsored our server in it, and I took, because I thought it was very fascinating what these artists did, so I took also content of that and put it in our installation. What else can I say?
Okay, I feel, although this talk is described as a lecture, which is somewhat pompous maybe, but I think you probably had enough, as it were, hairs started by us. Maybe we should, with your permission, maybe suggest that we turn this into a dialogue. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment, make a statement, ask a question, and we will do our best to try and answer your query. Yes, that gentleman there.
Yeah, actually, I'm sure that, when you make some project which is devoted to the, history of Russian art, you're free in choosing the whole background there. But for me, for the man who is born here, the background for all these people is the Russian Revolution. And when I have seen this, faces of actors, I cannot really just put it on the background of the revolution. They are so sweet. So it is really very smoothie and sweet and soft, and they are completely up to date. you know, it's really, I'm a bit shocked of really of the contrast of the documentary, you know, you have used.
Okay, I understood. First of all, I can say you also don't know about the period. You know, you've heard from your parents or your grandparents, and you've been taught about the period at school. I would quote Peter's words, there is no history, there are only historians. So it would be silly to pretend that we can make a document or create actors who are from that period and that they imitate them. So we chose for the message, we chose for the content. And I think we served them well that we did take that period and put them into a multimedia installation. We added something to that period. So this is our soft approach, but I think because of that, the message comes through.
Actually, you know, I think
you have not seen the installation yet, so maybe first see the whole thing, and then you come back.
I just want to talk only about this piece which we already seen on the screen.
It's a trailer.
So actually, just forgive me, please. I do not catch the message. What the distance between the? Surely I have, you know, small idea about the revolution, but I have it. And so the distance between the, you know, documentary I have seen, the, you know, photos I have seen, and
okay,
you know,
thank you.
And text I have read,
Next question.
it's very far.
Yeah, you know, your predicament is not just you. You know, there's a phenomenon in the cinema called the suspension of disbelief. You know when you watch a film that people aren't fucking or dying, but they are created in such a position that you believe or are, through the suspension of belief, suggesting that. Your position and your comments are extremely naive. Let me tell you an anecdote. Eisenstein, greatest film director that ever lived, and I'll stand behind that statement very, very strongly, he made a film called October, which was meant to be a reconstruction of the destruction and the revolution in the St. Petersburg Winter Palace. And everybody said it had nothing to do with the original revolution. Eisenstein broke far too many windows, created far much too destruction, and 3 days of noise, where the original assault of the Winter Palace was quiet, basically organized by women, and didn't create much destruction at all. But curiously, because nobody filmed the original event, Eisenstein's event in October was published all over the world as being the recording of the October Revolution. So you very cleverly deceived yourselves completely in using Eisenstein's reconstructions as standing for the right thing. So I think by that example is a supreme, as it were, self-reflexive suggestion that really ought to organize and to explain your criticism. Let me repeat again, there is no such thing as history. There's only historians.
It's not a criticism, just a question. You're absolutely right. I'm very naive. So I try to declare I'm really very naive. And the people who you talk about, they are also very, very naive. They are not smart, not tolerant. They're naive and rude. Just Russians.
Well, I couldn't have put it better. Thank you very much. Anybody else has a question?
I wanted to ask Saskia, maybe it will be a sort of continuation of the question. How did you work with actors? How did you help them to get into these characters of the artist? Did you want them to embody or like personify these artists in a sort of Stanislavski technique, or just to be the speakers for them, their representatives? And also, you partly have already answered this question. From what time these actors speak? Do they speak from the time when these artists, avant-garde artists, lived, or do they speak from nowadays? Sort of taking into consideration all the text and all the discussions that was about avant-garde. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. No, I asked them to answer your last questions. I asked them not to pretend they were the artists from that period, because we don't know how they are. And of course, they have a big advantage to me that they speak Russian and I don't speak Russian. And therefore, it had to be a very strong collaboration that the artists had to bring their own ideas from their Russian background into the project. And now someone is going to hate me because Alisa is one of the actors. So she can tell you how we worked.
На самом деле Саския нам дала свободу и пробовала с нами много-много-много эмоций на каждый кусок текста. И, видимо, сложилась такая команда, и мы репетировали много. И поэтому как-то все само собой происходило как каким-то волшебством. Когда мы выходили туда, все получалось. Но мы просто верили Саскии полностью, и поэтому, наверное, все так случилось.
Еще вопросы? Yes, 2014 is the centenary of the beginning of an event that is still to some degree remembered in Britain, which is the Russian craze. A century ago, Russia was the greatest foreign influence in Britain. The great Russian Golden Age writers were hitting the English language in translation, finally, after people had been reading them in French and German. It was a huge vogue for Dostoevsky and for Chekhov and for the Russian avant-garde artists. A century later, we should perhaps be looking back at that, given that this is, as we all know, the year of Anglo-Russian cultural relations. I assume that at least some of these cameras here are television cameras. I'm really not sure how many of the events that are being held in London this year for the Anglo-Russian Year of Culture are being televised. Whether it's actually broken through into television at all, and therefore into the wider popular consciousness. Peter, as someone who knows Britain, who is British, I'm wondering whether you could comment on whether you get any sense that there is possibly any asymmetry on the breadth of awareness of this year taking place in Britain and in Russia.
Well, I no longer live in Great Britain. My home now, very largely thanks to Saskia, is in Amsterdam. But of course, my eyes and ears are open. I can maybe talk with a little more authority and maybe a little more fascination with the condition of cinema, for example. I have been a great devotee of Russian cinema ever since I was a student in London when I was about 17, way back in the early 60s. But I found even then the name of Eisenstein was basically unknown to most of my contemporaries. And if you start talking about Podovkin and Dozhenko and even Vertov, these were very strange people who we hardly had any knowledge of. Since the 1960s and now again, thanks obviously to the efforts of things like the British Council and the British Film Institute and the National Film Theatre, we're all a little more aware. But there still is an enormous ignorance, I think, in terms of even the upper echelons of British cultural endeavour to still find that all these people are comparatively unknown, certainly when you compare it, for example, with the French activity at the same time and certainly with the Italian activity at the same time. And I'm absolutely convinced, that events like we have now been fortunate enough to participate in and the general background that you're talking about must surely be good. We live supposedly in the age of communication. We're going to have to communicate and use every single means of production to do that. So I suppose, long answer to your shorter question, yes, there is a profound sense of ignorance, and we must do something about that sensation, indeed, of not knowing what we really ought to know. So again, let me repeat, opportunities like this are a certain sort of godsend to be able, we sincerely hope, to enlarge that sense of communication.
Hello. Maybe I missed it and you already talked about it, but what is the unique of your way of representing the Russian avant-garde?
Well, can I make again, I suppose it's a reconsideration of what's already been said from this table, and it is relevant, I think, to this man's anxiety here. There is no such thing, absolutely no such thing, as an objective exhibition. Even if you put white paintings in a white box, you're already making a comment which is related to a certain subjectivity. There is in the museum world somehow a desire to be what could be described in inverted commas as neutral. But that's an impossibility. Whether you are a really first-rate curator, like, for example, all maybe the directors of our national museums all over Europe, indeed all over the world, or whether, in fact, you are, shall we say, a much more maverick concern, somebody like an artist like Robert Wilson or John Cage, for example, who's asked to put on a curatorial exhibition, then we fully accept that it's going to be a subjective opinion. Now, let me repeat, there is no such thing as an objective exhibition. But we should treasure that. There are many, many people in the room, and you have, all of you, your own opinions about this event, however you learnt about it. But your subjectivity is also very, very important. So I think generally the curatorial world now is accepting the notion of the subjectivity of the individual and giving more and more permission to allow that to happen. So in answering again to your question, what we think is a characteristic of this exhibition, a decidedly self-reflective idea of the notion of the subjectivity of the notion of an installation or an exhibition. We make no apology for that, as you can see, but obviously I think maybe there has to be a change of frame here, a notion of a different way of looking at the huge cultural heritage we all enjoy and experience that belongs to every single one of us, but it has to come at a certain sort of price, but I believe that price is very honorable and very creditable, and that price is the notion of subjectivity.
Hello. So if we're talking about subjectivity, my question is, so what is your own subjective perception of the period, and what do you think is the spirit of this period? Thank you.
Well, we know, again, please remember that that homily, that there's no such thing as history, there's only historians. History cannot be revisited, so we are, occasionally, I suppose, if we believe in it, there's a notion that we take the witnesses of that period, and there are many, many evidences of witnesses. We have all the artworks, for example, they could still speak to us. And there's a way where all the anecdotes and all the local political and social, I suppose, coloring of the period tends to fade or to change. We're still left with the artwork. So that essentially is the evidence. And now we would like to imagine that's the supreme evidence to be considered. There is a way in which the whole phenomenon, it depends where you want to start. Some people would start the Russian avant-garde way back in 1890. There are even some attempts to make it even earlier. Certain representative people who are associated with the political and the social situation are already feeling a great sense of discomfort about the conditions in which culture is taking. Like, take, for example, that whole aesthetic movement of art for art's sake, which was a very British phenomenon, which was very much against the general aegis of the notion that somehow art should be representative. It should be able to speak to absolutely everybody and not the elitists. And these ideas were being expressed here in Moscow and more importantly in St. Petersburg way back in the 1870s. So you could trace, as it were, the roots of the avant-garde a long way back. Some people would suggest that maybe even Kandinsky is not really part of the phenomenon because he's making inroads into notions of abstract expressionism, certainly by 1895, 1896. There's a quarrel, isn't there, between Mondrian and Kandinsky, who was the first representational artist who threw away figuration completely and began to become really serious about notions of non-figuration. But I think that's an argument we can leave maybe to the competitive art critics. And then you could say maybe that the avant-garde, Russian avant-garde, started in 1905 with all sorts of social unrest, which was happening certainly in this city. And then again, I suppose you could have to wait to what? The beginnings of the Mexican Revolution. You know how Eisenstein was deeply fascinated by the Mexican Revolution, which happened at least 8 or 9 years before the revolution in this country. And there was a lot of correspondence. People like Diego Rivera, for example, came as a denizen and as an enthusiast for the Mexican Revolution. He was here, I think, probably by 1919, discussing about the Mexican experience, which so fascinated Eisenstein, so that eventually he used that knowledge when he went to Mexico in 1929. And then again, I suppose some people would really fix it on 1917, which would need to be coalesced completely with all the the revolutionary political and social activities. And then we would think about an end date. Somebody says that maybe it's all over by what, 1925? Some people say 1929. Some people say it's still going on. But I would think probably that the beginning of the Second World War could be said to be the absolute final date. So already we had a shifting period. And you know how journalism really creates art history. And journalism works on the procedure of trying to make things tidy, to try and put things in boxes, to give things names, for example. And there's an awful lot of isms that are going around at the beginning of the 20th century. I mean, do you know what purism is? You know, sometimes the isms were so defined that perhaps only one person or even two people or only one person for 6 months actually belonged to a movement. So the whole situation is very, very maneuverable. And again, depends upon your subjectivity. But there is undoubtedly, to answer your question, a great wave of enthusiasm for cultural activities, for the notion of how those cultural activities have to be responsible. And I rather suspect, because really I suppose the period I know a lot about would be the golden age of Dutch painting, which basically I think is what starts about 1606 and is finished by the death of Vermeer in about 1670. That was a period which really understood that art to be successful had to be related deeply to notions of social and political realities. Most of the period before about 1600 was very much within the aegis of either the aristocracy, very privileged, or certainly the church, with the main commissioners of art, I suppose, ever since the beginnings of Christianity right up until, shall we say, Martin Luther in 1517. So there is a way, I think, that what is the exciting, the Dutch Golden Age was very much related to bourgeois preoccupations, moneyed middle-class preoccupations, much larger than ever before in terms of culture and art. But suddenly the excitement, I think, about the 1970 Cultural Revolution is its relationship to people in entirety. It is a revolution about egalitarian art. There was a real determination that cultural activities, cultural fascination is for absolutely everybody. When you read all the personal memoirs and the diaries and also the public manifestos of this period, you realize how that's most important. And I think that for me, as a practitioner of cinema, which is supposed to be the grand egalitarian art, that is really importantly significant.
When you talk about Russian art and Russian avant-garde, I agree with you. But I would like to talk about your film, the video that you made. And you know what? When I saw it, I just thought it's absolutely not passionate. These people, they were very passionate, and in your film there is no passion at all. That's what I'm talking about. And I know that you are one of the greatest directors, and I know that you can feel passion. And here, it's quite strange for me.
I'm very sorry you don't feel it, because I feel it enormously. I want to make a very dangerous remark also about the gentleman next to you. You don't own the Russian avant-garde.
No, I don't.
It's not yours.
Well, it's not yours the same.
No, let me speak.
But I'm Russian and you're not. That's what's mine. No, I just want to say, when you're making film about Russian avant-garde...
Are you interested in my answer or not?
Once again, please...
Can I speak?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, thank you. My family background, I make it personal, is of the Second World War. The parents of and the family of my mother, they disappeared. They disappeared in camps. It was harsh period. I'm a grandchild. I don't know what it was. I cannot feel it. I live very privileged. I have a house, I have a car, I have a husband, I have a child I can send to university. I don't know the pain of my parents. And I don't own it. and they don't own it. And why I don't want to own it is because we all need to own it. It is property of everyone over the whole world. Because
I agree with that.
we should stop these things. And then as an artist, you can choose how you tell about this. How you want to express yourself about this period. If you, after visiting my installation, of our installation, you still feel it's not passionate, and you don't get the message I'm trying to tell, then we can talk again. But you first see it.
I think I should see it.
Yes.
Or when I have this opportunity, when you will show it. Oh, okay. Thank you.
I have a question for Peter. I want to take on your answer about subjectivity of any exhibition. And I want to ask, after seeing the installation, whether we will be able to understand your subjective opinion about the avant-garde, and also what were the specific questions you asked yourself about avant-garde, because avant-garde has a lot of aspects and a lot of discourses inside it. So what was your focus? Thank you.
You know, Mao Zedong was once asked, Mao, what do you think of the French Revolution? And he said, sorry, it's too soon to tell. There is a way that, you know, the Russian avant-garde, 100 years old very, very soon, but there is a way in which, of course, the jury is still out. We're still trying to decipher against all the barriers of ignorance, deliberate, mischievous ignorance in some cases, what exactly that phenomenon is. So in a sense, we would have to allow, I suppose related again back to that idea that there's no such thing as history, there's only historians, and every single generation remakes its history. You're not, in this country, alone in practicing that particular activity. It happens everywhere. It happens in every single society, whatever their political and social systems are. We are talking again about something which you haven't seen. In a curious way, you can't have seen it if you went. We took you next door. Even the exhibition is not complete, and we will not be finished until probably about 6 o'clock on Monday night. And even only then we will realize, when all the parts are put together in the greatest professional way in which we can manage, that perhaps only we will then really understand what the phenomenon is. And then maybe after 3 or 4 days looking at it again maybe will transpose into a different way, and we will begin to understand the situation in its entirety. But let me ask you a question. I don't think you would offer me a criticism that is being made maybe here about one of my films. Why cannot we regard, since you all accept, I am sure, the notion of a film as being a subjective entity, why we cannot accept the idea of an exhibition as being a subjective entity? Or is there a way that you feel you cannot transfer that particular attitude towards the notion of a fiction film towards your notion of what an exhibition would be? Maybe one of our most exciting possibilities here with this exhibition is to convince you about the changing nature of an exhibition. Neither of us can argue much longer on this occasion, because neither us, although we're much more privileged than you, and certainly not you, because neither of us yet have seen the exhibition. Let's talk again at this time next week.
Мой вопрос в том, планируется ли показать этот проект где-то в других странах, и существуют ли вообще в других странах проекты подобного рода? Спасибо.
Well, we hope that we can, this is the premiere of this project. We made it for a Media Art Lab and a Manège. We hope it will travel to other places. I hope that we can show it, for example, in England, but that's is all a bit flaky at the moment because of the situation with the Ukraine and the sensitivities. So it's waiting what the future will bring if we can do that. But we will put all our efforts in it to make that possible.
Ну, наверное, уже 3 часа 5 минут. Мы, наверное, уже должны заканчивать нашу презентацию, лекцию, пресс-конференцию. Я хочу просто добавить, что проект, правда, уникальный. Он сделан силами Манежа при участии Media Lab, но это первый такой большой продакшн-проект. Вот поверьте мне, что нам не привезли как бы этот взгляд Питера Гринуэя и Саския Боддеке откуда-либо, а конкретно Манеж инициировал создание этой инсталляции и до сих пор расхлебывается за эту инициацию. Вот. И себя я оправдываю как автор большого проекта тем, что даже если специалистам где-то что-то не понравится, образы покажутся немножечко лубочными, то это не важно. Это важно, что это западный взгляд на наш русский авангард, и это взгляд людей, которые сами говорят на другом метаязыке, которые на самом деле также инновационные и также относятся к измененному нашему пространству и нашему бытию и обладанию этими новыми языками, как и художники авангарда. Это наш авангард сегодняшнего дня. И он немножечко стал нашим русским, потому что они с нами сейчас рождают вот эту 18-экранную проекцию. Ну, а события, о которых мы вам расскажем буквально через 3 минуты, помогут вам более глубоко войти в тему всех инноваций, которые были задуманы в русском авангарде и продолжаются сегодня. А главная эта инновация – это все-таки соединить воедино театр, кино, музыку, визуальное искусство, архитектуру, и это то, что вы точно увидите на нашей инсталляции. Вот этот синтез, это погружение и эмоции, конечно, вот мне кажется, что ролик Питер и Саски сделали таким образом, что вы должны были услышать месседж текстовый, чего давал русский авангард, не только художественный, но и политический. А вот уже как же этот месседж будет работать эмоционально, и будет ли он работать эмоционально, мы увидим, наверное, на инсталляции. Но, опять-таки, хочу акцентировать ваше внимание, что для того, чтобы посмотреть ее целиком, это ни много ни мало, даже не 144 минуты. 144 минуты центральная часть, но боковые части все завязаны на центральной, то есть это как минимум, наверное, 288 минут.